Yeah, David, we're just having a few technical matters just sorted. We'll be up running shortly.
Thanks, Dave. David, what's the nature of the problem?
It's just an IT issue here, David. We're not far off. Sorry about this.
That's all right. Are people in the meeting or not yet?
I think it's a YouTube issue, David. It's when we live stream on YouTube for the public. So we're just trying to get that sorted out.
Welcome to the Hawkesbury Local Planning Panel meeting for 16th of February 2023. Just like to apologise for those waiting on. A few technological issues, so apologies for the delay in starting. The panel has been appointed by the Minister for Planning and the Council to determine certain categories of development application. My name is David Ryan. I'm the chairperson for today's panel. Other panelists with me today are Wayne Carter, who's the state appointed member, John Brunton, state appointed member, and Preti Karan, this is the community representative. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, their elders past and present. As a courtesy to others, please ensure that your microphones are on mute at all times unless I call you to speak. This meeting is being audio-visually recorded, and the audio recording will be via podcast on the Council's website. Any part of this meeting that is held in closed session will not be recorded. In terms of the Privacy and Personal Information Protection Act, the personal information provided at the meeting will be recorded. The provision of any information that is recorded is voluntary. Any person who does not wish to be recorded should not address the panel. Under the panel's code of conduct, panel members are required to disclose any pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest in relation to matters on today's agenda, and each panelist has completed a disclosure in those terms. I declare that I have no conflicts of interest in relation to today's agenda and ask each of the panel members whether they have any conflicts of interest to declare. Wayne?
I have no conflicts to declare.
John?
I have no conflicts to declare.
Preti?
I have no conflicts of interest to declare.
Thank you. The panel will deal with the items on in agenda order. The panel has visited each site as relevant, read the assessment report prepared by council officers and any written submissions received. As we progress through the agenda, only those people who have registered to speak will be permitted to address the panel. Those making submissions are given 3 minutes to speak, although I may permit extra time where appropriate to do so. At the end of your submission, please remain in the meeting to permit the panel to ask questions. For each item on the agenda, once all submitters have addressed the panel will adjourn into closed session to deliberate. This may take some time. Generally, the panel will resume the meeting to announce the decision in public, however. The determinations of the panel will be confirmed in the official minutes, which will be available on the council's website likely next week. On today's agenda, we have 2 items, DA 97/22, 22 Bosworth Street, Richmond, and the second item is DA 146/22, 55 Wells Street, Pitt Town. Starting with item number 1, I have one person registered to speak, Maria Lacerdo, who is speaking for the recommendation. And I can see Maria there. Maria, do you wish to address the panel?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
I do realise the panel is concerned specifically with the technical issues of the DA, but I also wanted to give some background of the project and its significance to the community. The Women's Cottage, for those of you who don't know, has been operating in the Hawkesbury for 40 years, supporting vulnerable women and children. And this extension is going to enable us to increase our services and support more women. It's also, I think, significant to know that the funds raised for this are completely external to council. So it's not costing council any money. The money's come from government grants, from 10 years of community donations, and also the builder is providing a significant donation or discount because it's a community project. And it will be enhancing council's infrastructure, but will also secure a resource for the community, as the Women's Cottage has a 30-year lease with council. I think we're about 4 years into that now. So this is a resource that will be at minimum available to community for the next 26 years. I'm really happy to answer any questions if you'd like.
Thanks, Ms. Lazzerto. Does any panelist have a question for Ms. Lazzerto?
No questions.
No questions.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I have no questions either. So thank you, Ms. Lazzerto. I'd just like to flag that the panelists have reviewed the information, as I said, and we are minded to approve the application with the recommendations, with a slight tweak to one of the recommendations, recommended conditions, which required as a deferred commencement condition relation to an easement, which we're proposing to move into an operational condition. So it doesn't delay the coming into operation of the consent as it was currently recommended. So that will be formalised subsequent to this open part of the meeting. But that's certainly what you could take that away as being what the council's the panel is proposing to do. So thank you for your time. Thank you for presenting to the panel, and you're welcome to stay, or you can welcome to leave. Thank you.
I'm happy to stay for a little bit longer until it's time for me to formally leave.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, we'll move to item 2, which is DA 14622 55 Well Street, Pitt Town, 11 lot subdivision and associated subdivision works. I have 3 registered speakers, 2 speaking against the proposal, Mr. Hargraves and Mr. Jamieson. And then after I hear from them, David Carruthers will be given an opportunity to respond. Mr. Hargraves, Mr. Jamieson, who would wish to speak first? Okay, if you could just announce yourself.
Yep, Jake Hargraves.
Okay, and you have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. My name is Jake Hargraves. I reside at 70 Wells Street with my 2-year-old daughter and my wife. My home predates the subdivision works and associated adopted infrastructure. My house is above the 2100 levels and previously unaffected by stormwater or floods. The DA application proposed stormwater solution is fully dependent on an out-of-catchment redirection of stormwater to a council-designed, owned and operated drainage basin at 44 Mitchell. Council was both the determinator and the applicator of that, and thus must have some sort of biased views on it. The DEA is required to have 17,000 cubic metres of dirt or 430 truck and dog movements to reshape the land to move the water towards the site or the way it naturally flows. The above basin adjoins the western boundary of my property and discharges western down towards my home and across the rear of my property. Nor the council or the applicant have a easement over my land to drain water. The basin design has its own set of conditions under the DA of the basin and based on the rules and guidelines set out in the adopted stormwater management strategy, which also the DA must comply with that we're hearing today. This document concludes in black and white in the conclusion part that the property at 70 Wells Street will not be encroached upon. The conditions of approval of the basin dated the 30th of October 2018, all natural water flow from adjoining properties is not impeded, diverted, and the surface and subsurface water flows are not redirected or concentrated onto adjoining properties. Overall, both the basin and the applicant today for the subdivision must abide by the adopted DCP rules. These 2 rules outline the amount of stormwater generated up to a 100 event and discharge to the horseshoe is reduced and not increased. The risk of localised flooding within Pitt Town is minimised and not increased. The above rules are there to guide the development for those who live there. On paper, councils claim the property is unaffected. The reality has now been documented and assessed by Ndidi, stormwater expert, who has assessed the March 22 performance of the basin and the impacts it had on my phone. To be frank, the Ndidi report renders the council's comments in this DA fallacious. The Ndidi report in my submission outlines in detail the flaws of the basin, the prediction by Ndidi that this would occur, and the photographic evidence of the breaches of the DCP, the conditions of consent, and the guidelines I mentioned above. The NDD report outlines the flood warning required for the base approval was breached 3 times in 1 week, which council peer review claims is an impossible event, even in a 1 in 100. In fact, the pipework designed by the peer review that they claim, it opted for a smaller size base, smaller size piping that drains my property. This, in fact, design contributed to the flooding of the north half of my property and the only egress and exit of my property during a flood. Councils recklessly adopted this, and as a result, in March 22, the basin discharged 3 times, went back up the diversion pipe, flooding the north half 4 acres of my property, and to the point that it reached my home and inundated my home with water. That's why I brought indeed Mr. Jamis along to answer any questions. In summary, the basin's current state does not meet its conditions of consent, the aims of the DCP, or the guidelines of this overall stormwater management plan. Thus, the water cannot be captured and redirected from this approval or proposed DA subdivision. There are alternatives for the developer, as I know RAC developments do a quality development. I don't oppose any other aspects of the DA, other than that it's going to impact a young family's home and render it completely worthless and uninhabitable. The officer's comments indicate that I did meet with council, Will Barton. Mr. Will Barton, in that meeting with Mr. Jamieson present, indicated to me that he was aware that the basin was not working and that possible solutions were being present, one of which stage 2 of the basin may. He didn't give reassurance or absolute that it will not flood my home. He stated that I was to propose an overall solution, as my engineers had come up with one, and to table it to council. I've done this to council, and it was addressed to the GM in November 22, and we have not heard back from council's gauged in solicitor Clyde & Co, even though my legal representative followed up multiple times today. Thank you for your time, and I urge everyone to read the NDD report, as it's assessed by a leading stormwater expert on the impacts of my thing, and not to flood a young family home. Like it's a pretty reasonable position that I'm in, and pretty reasonable request. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mr. Hargrove. I know you do have your engineer here, but before I ask Mr. Jamieson to join us, is any questions from any of the panelists of Mr. Hargrove?
I don't have,
Yeah, go on, John.
I don't have any questions. I think there's some good reports been submitted that have answered my questions.
Thank you. Wayne?
I have a question. I didn't quite catch what he said about the events of 2022. Did the basin overtop and discharge over the spillway? Is that what he meant?
Mr. Hargrove?
That's correct. I documented the basin discharging over the wall on the second event. The first time it happened, my wife called me and said, "You please come home, the water is surrounding my home." So I rushed there. I did evacuate my daughter and my wife out. I had to borrow a 4-wheel drive from work to transverse the water. On the second time, I went back and I stayed at the residence with my dog, and I went well above to document the event. So I took photographs, which is in the NDD report, of the spillway thing. I took videos of the spillway over discharging, and I also took videos of the water discharging so violently that it went back up the diversion pipe, flooding the whole entire egress and exit of my property.
Thank you.
Rita, did you have any questions, Mr. Hargrove?
Mr. Hargrove, I heard you mention you did made a proposal to the council in respect of any alternate solution to the problem. Would you be able to tell me in a nutshell what it was?
Yeah, sure. We proposed, to this point, I had several meetings with council to date. I've racked up a cost to myself of $300,000 between engineers, LiDAR, surveying, multiple reports. The proposal to council was that my team had come up with a viable solution. We asked for the reimbursement of my costs to date because the basin has failed. And within that document, it talks about how my land to the north can be altered, walls can be built to protect my home, and basically parts of my property would be inundated with water, but at least the residency would be unaffected, and my egress and exit, which is north, my only exit and entry to the property, would be filled and raised to meet the dam wall height, and therefore I could safely exit. But I don't believe that my family and me should endure the cost of having to do those corrections.
Thank you.
One more question.
That's fine.
How long have you lived in that house on that property?
I purchased the house. I've been there a fair while now. I don't know the exact date. I couldn't tell you, but it'll be 11 years. The
And you
house
haven't-
was previously built by someone else.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Mr. Hargrave.
No, thank you.
Mr. Jamieson? Mr. Jamieson with you? I can see him there. Mr. Jamieson? Is there any way we can let Mr. Jamieson know he's on?
Sure, I'll just give him a call right now to make sure he's there.
Okay. I'll just wait a moment for that, otherwise I might move on to Mr. Carruthers.
Sorry, Peter's just suffering some technical difficulties, so he's asked his IT team to resolve it. So he's hoping to be on shortly. So if you wanted to listen to someone else, sure.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Carruthers, I can see you there. Hopefully you can hear me and are able to join.
Yes, thank you. I can
Could you
hear.
just announce yourself, who you're representing?
Yes, my name's David Carruthers. I'm speaking on behalf of the property owner in support of the development and council's recommendation. Thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. There's a couple of issues. One was the road layout, but I'll skip over that because it doesn't seem to be the major issue, other than what we're proposing with the development is in accordance with the council's adopted development control plan, hierarchy plan, and the flood evacuation route. So as part of the development, the construction in front of the site of Wells Street will contribute to the future flood evacuation route for the Pitttown area. In relation to drainage, this development is part of the catchment designed to flow to the 44 Mitchell Road Basin in accordance with Council's Pitttown stormwater management strategy. The basin's existing has been sized to accommodate all the flows from the nominated central precinct catchment, including this site. The existing water from the development currently surface flows to the east, then south via the existing topography and drainage arrangements. This flows naturally to the stormwater basin. The proposal's been designed to drain to Council's trunk drainage system located immediately and adjoining the southern part of the development in Wells Street. This is existing and has been installed in accordance with the adopted Pitttown stormwater management strategy. It's been sized, designed and constructed specifically for this purpose. The 44 Mitchell Road Basin was never designed to be a flood mitigation device. It was designed to accommodate the current drainage volumes post-development, which we understand it does. Current low-lying areas, including those previously sand mined, will continue to be subject to localised flooding in major events. The Pitttown stormwater management strategy was informed, designed and peer-reviewed by international civil engineers. It's been constructed in accordance with this and is operating to service the central precinct of which this subdivision proposal is part of and has been designed for. This basin and associated trunk drainage is subject to Section 64 contributions, of which much has already been collected by council, both from my client and other developers within the catchment. The contributions on this site alone will be in the order of $400,000 or $36,000 per lot. So in closing, this proposal is compliant in every aspect. It complies with the Hawkesbury LEP, complies with the Pitttown Development Control Plan, complies with state planning policies. We've already executed and paid for a state voluntary planning agreement with the Department of Planning in relation to this site. There'll be an additional $400,000 payable specifically for stormwater management of this catchment and basin, in addition to an extra $400,000 in Section 7.11 contributions. Again, the development is compliant in all regards and is supported by council and their consultants. So thanks for your time and support, and we look forward to continuing to be able to make a contribution to Pitt Town and the Hawkesbury. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Carruthers. Panel, any questions? Start with Wayne.
No questions, thank you.
No questions, thank you.
John?
Can I just clarify a point? So you're saying that the water from this site currently would flow into the basin, but as part of a natural overland flow system, whereas once the subdivision is completed, the water will still go into the basin, but through a piped system. So potentially just get there a bit earlier. Is that a fair summation?
That's exactly correct.
So further to John's question, in extreme rain, does stormwater from this property, does it overland flow and reach the low-lying areas near the basin, or is it directed into the basin currently?
Currently, this lot, and there are 3 adjoining 5-acre or 2-hectare allotments to the east of it, currently falls there would flow overland as more or less a laminar rather than a concentrated flow, generally in an easterly direction, where it is collected and then flows to the basin. So what the development proposes is to collect this water and formalise it and direct it into council's existing trunk drainage system located in Wells Street. There's already pipes in Wells Street completed to the basin. They're in the order of 1,500 millimetre pipes. These are large stormwater pipes that have been designed specifically to accommodate not just this development, but other development in the precinct.
Thank you.
Mr. Carruthers, you heard Mr. Hargrave's lived experience now with current conditions. Could I get your view on that, and if you're able, the relevant reasons for that, and what the situation will be if this application is approved in the absence of the proposed council works to the basin, and then following council's proposed works. How do you see his situation changing, if at all, as a result of those 3 scenarios? Now, immediately after, without the final basin solution, and then after the final basin solution?
Well, firstly, let me say I'm not a hydraulics engineer, so my response is not that of an expert in this regard. To answer your first question, I have sympathy for Mr. Hargraves. He's obviously located in a low-lying area. This area was previously sand mined and is probably a local anomaly in terms of contours and drainage patterns. My interpretation is that the basin, the pipe, the catchment, the entire stormwater management strategy has been designed to accommodate all of these flows. Now, whether or not that's happening is a question for the engineers. Whether or not the basin is functioning as it was intended, I don't know. That is probably a question for another day. But ultimately, the development that we're proposing is compliant with the modelling, the calculations, and the catchment for which this basin was designed. Was there anything else that you were asking?
No, that's okay. If you, I wasn't aware of your qualifications, so if you're not qualified to comment on or respond to my question, that's fine. I may after hearing from Mr. Jamieson, ask council the same question. No more questions from Mr. Carruthers, panelists. Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. If you could put yourself back on mute.
Thank you.
And I believe we have Mr. Jamieson with us now. Is that right, Mr. Jamieson? Mr. Jamieson? Still having problems? Tracy, can you see what's happening there?
He's actually on the phone, but he's muted himself. And when they're on the phone, we're actually unable to unmute them.
Okay. So he's able to participate, but he has to unmute himself.
Correct.
I'm not sure whether Mr. Jamieson can hear us. So Hargraves, are you having any luck yourself for your end?
Okay. Peter's saying he's unable to mute. I can, I know it's a bit unorthodox, but I can put him on loudspeaker and run him through my screen if you like.
Well, that's fine. As long as we can hear him, it's okay.
Okay, we'll give it a go. I'll put it on loudspeaker and I'll let Peter talk. Hi, Peter, you're on loudspeaker.
Okay, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
For some reason, I've been trapped by Zoom. I can watch you, but I haven't been able to listen to you other than on the phone. So I have not a lot of knowledge of what's been said before, but please go on.
It's a bit difficult to recap everything that's been said. Did you have any things that you wanted to inform the panel of?
Yeah, I did hear a little bit from Mr. Carruthers just then. So prior to this basin being built, everything, or prior to the council putting the basin in, going back to about 2000 or so, everything north of Wells Road used to flow to the northeast to the Hunter River Hawkesbury River about 1.3 k's ago, 1.3 k's away. And then when the basin was put in, they started to divert more flow down past Jake's Place, to the extent that the catchment increased in size significantly, and the flows past Jake's Place in volume as a result of this are now about 10 times as much, or will be by the time they develop the full catchment, about 10 times as much as it was prior to this basin being built. Now, council have maintained that the basin has been designed to take all these flows. The issue with it is that the basin is undersized, which we've told council on numerous occasions. And that was demonstrated by the March storm event, where the modelling that council had done as part of their basin indicated that the 1 in 100-year flood level adjacent to Jake's Place would be 300 millimetres lower than the actual observed flood levels when in March 22. So the water came up to within 2 centimetres of his house. Council's modelling said it should be at least 300 millimetres lower. The storm wasn't a 1 in 100-year storm. Our calculations are that the discharge that came out of that basin, just from even having half the catchment developed, was equal to what they'd modelled for the 1 in 100-year storm. And there's more to be diverted to that space. So take the information, as we basically develop this proposed development now, that will result in more impervious area, greater runoff in terms of peak discharge and in terms of volume. Without this development in place, the basin has already exceeded its design standards. And with this development in place, it can do nothing but get worse. So Jake's house was within 2 centimetres of being inundated. His floor levels were within 2 centimetres of being inundated in March. This development goes ahead. There is nothing that can happen other than his house will be flooded. So that's his personal house point of view. Jake also has his land is zoned so that he could subdivide it. The problem is that to get into council's basin, Jake would need to fill his land to above the dam wall level to be able to get it to free drain to the basin. There is a pipe on one side of the basin, which is about 750 mils, I think, which takes flow from Jake's property and from the properties upstream of Jake's place. That's already resulting in backwater flows from the basin back into Jake's place now. And if he went to develop his land, he couldn't put more flow into that space. He would have to actually lift the whole basin, lift his whole property, basically, to be able to do that, to get it to flow into that space. So the proposal or the basin as built is, as we've said, significantly undersized. This proposed development will just make that even worse from Jake's place in terms of flooding. And council has really restricted his ability to be able to develop his land in the future by the way that basin's been built. And the sort of flow coming in will get even worse too. In the approval or the approval for the consent for the basin, there's a clause 44 which says that the basin will not impede flows or impact on Jake's property. Now, there's lots of evidence showing that that's not the case already, all right? It's already breached that condition on numerous occasions. And Jake's got footage and photos of all that, and we can show you where that's come from. So this basin is not doing what it was supposed to do, even for half the catchment developed. You develop the other half, and it'll be a significant problem.
Thank you, Mr. Jemison. Are there any questions for Mr. Jemison from panelists? Yes, Wayne?
Okay, so I want to understand a little bit about how this basin is or isn't working. So I'm assuming the basin has got, from your report, I'm assuming the basin has got a 750 mil outlet pipe, and it will also have a spillway, which I can see on the aerial. It have a spillway at a higher level than that. Can you firstly confirm that that's the design, a 750 mil outlet pipe and a spillway above that level?
Okay, so the 750 mil outlet pipe is purely to take the flows from Jake's property and upstream properties, okay? And they divert around the basin. They don't go into the basin, and they discharge at about where the basin's discharge point is. The basin itself has some 375 millimetre pipes across the bottom of it that allow low flow. Now they've been blocked, and then there's a higher flow pipe, and then there's an emergency spillway above that, okay? The issue that we have is that downstream of where the basin is, when the basin discharges, downstream of there is quite flat. And so as the water flows over the spillway or out of the pipes from the basin, it backs up and it actually inundates that 750 millimetre pipe. And so what actually happens is the flows go back up the 750 millimetre pipe onto Jake's place rather than down past Jake's place and through from that point. And council's works, no matter what they do, is not going to change that tailwater effect or change that flow because their works are focused in the basin. And so that will get even worse again, causing more flooding on Jake's place.
Okay, so in the events in 22, did the spillway overtop?
We think the spillway did overtop. We saw water basically up to the top of it in that space.
So Jake says there were photos of that, but there aren't, that I can see, any photos in the report.
I can provide the photos.
Yeah.
So those photos were in a report that we supplied to council. So the council will have them on record already.
Yeah, okay. As I said, I was trying to get an understanding of how the basin was designed to function, and how it was actually functioning. That's what my questions were about. Which does come back to the fact that your argument with council is about the basin design. we're considering today a development. But thank you. That's all the questions I have for the moment.
Thanks, Wayne. Pretty, did you have any questions, Mr. Jamieson?
I
I
don't
have a
have
comment in regard to that. So this development.
Sorry, just who's speaking now?
Sorry.
No, I've asked Ms. Carrado if she has any questions.
Sorry.
I don't have any questions from Mr. Jamieson. Thank you.
John?
No questions.
Was that Mr. Hargrave speaking?
That was Peter before.
Oh,
Sorry.
Peter.
On the loudspeaker through my screen.
Okay. Sorry. Yes, if you could just wait to get the call before you speak.
Sure.
Mr. Jamieson, just a quick response.
Basically, this development is being considered on the basis that the basin works. All right. And that what council's designed for it and all the rest of it. And the only reason that they can develop, or they could divert this water down into the basin is that the design was in place and council's sort of satisfied themselves that it works and there's no real issues. What's actually happening is they're taking water from one sub-catchment of the Hawkesbury River and putting it into another sub-catchment. And that other sub-catchment wasn't ever designed to take that flow. And basically, the impacts that we're talking about is effectively an out-of-catchment diversion that's coming through. Now, that's happened for the western side of the development that's already occurred north of Wells Road, and that's already causing problems. And now it's going to continue, and you actually add another 10 hectares or thereabouts to the catchment flowing into that space. So even though this is a basin problem, the assumption that the DA can be approved is based on the assumption that the basin works, and the basin doesn't work.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Jameson. Look, because it's been slightly disjointed with our speakers, I'll give Mr. Carruthers a further opportunity to respond. Mr. Carruthers?
Yes, thank you. Look, I don't really have anything to add to that, other than the basis upon which this development should be approved is the engineering design of the basin. Now, if that is undersized or not performing, whether that be blocked, whether that be because it's operating as a sediment basin at the moment rather than as a wetland, then that is something that can be addressed or would be addressed or is addressed in the stormwater management strategy, again, of which council has collected a lot of funding so far and will do into the future to address these issues.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Carruthers. Because some of the questioning or comments relate to the council basin, I will ask council staff if they have any response to any of the matters raised. Stephen, is there any, or Andrew, is there anyone who, the council engineer still there or not?
Council's engineer is not available just at the moment. Obviously, we will provide some advice in the closed session. I mean, as David mentioned, obviously there are contributions that have been collected that is going towards the conversion. Whilst Mr. Carruthers has referred to, you know, significant contributions being paid up to this point, that obviously for the construction of it, that expended some of those funds. In terms of other issues that Jake Hargraves has had meetings with council's general manager and infrastructure director. I'm not aware of those discussions in detail, but I have received commentary from the director that it's council's position that it generally acts in accordance with how it was to be designed. So again, council's engineer can provide some further commentary in the closed session.
Okay. All right then. Unless panelists, any other questions or comments?
David,
before we adjourn? Yes.
I might like to ask a follow-up question with Mr. Jemison. Mr. Jemison's report, and he is based on his claim that they've redirected, the council has redirected some of the stormwater flow from these properties. He says they used to flow northeast with a short passage down to the river. And he says now the system as designed has been redirected so that the catchment area is some 58 hectares now, and that the basin is designed on that by Cardno. Now, if that's the case, then the basin itself will be designed for that larger catchment area, to cater for that larger catchment area, and should obviously function effectively once all the flow is directed from the whole 58 hectares. Given, yes, it's a given that the downstream watercourse capabilities might be exceeded if it's true that originally there wasn't that much water went toward the basin and that long trek around via the lagoon to the river. And then yes, there might be some problems downstream, but the basin should be functioning perfectly okay if it was designed by Cardno to cater for 58 hectares. So I can't kind of reconcile the claims the basin itself is failing with that assessment. I'm not sure whether Mr. Jemison's got any comments in that regard.
Mr. Jamieson?
Yes, I do. So basically, if you assume that the catchment area is 58 hectares, and it wasn't, it was about 9, all right, if you assume it's 58 hectares and you do the calculations that they've done, they came up with a peak discharge of about 5, it's Cardno, sorry, came up with a peak discharge of about 5 metres cube per second during a 100-year event for the existing catchment. In actual fact, it was about 1.5 metres cube per second coming down that catchment. Okay, because the catchment wasn't as big as Cardno had modelled. So when they designed the basin, they designed it to discharge at 5 metres cube per second rather than 1.5 metres cube per second. If that basin had been designed for 1.5 metres cube per second, it would be twice to 3 times as big as it is. Okay, so that's where the issue has come about. The March storm, which wasn't a 100-year event, resulted in discharges greater than 5 metres cube per second from that basin. And the furphy about it being a wetland or a sediment basin or all that, or pipes being opened or not opened, is not really going to improve the performance of that basin. Once it becomes a wetland, its storage volume, the available surcharge volume, will decrease. And so this future change that council talks about is only going to make things from Jake's point of view and from the downstream flow point of view worse, because it's an undersized basin in the first place. By the time they fill it and they put the wetland bits in and open a couple of pipes, that pipe they're opening is only a 300 mil pipe. What's effectively going to happen is that a dry basin that's supposed to be there, once they open that pipe, it'll be wet because there's water already ponded downstream of that where that pipe is, so it'll flow back in. So that basin's volume will probably go down to 70% of what it is now or less. Okay, and so it's failing already during a 1 in 50 year or about a 1 in 50 year event, and it's only got half the catchment diverted to it.
I understand your comments. Thank you.
May I comment, Chair?
Apologies, I hit the wrong button. Just a very brief response, please, Mr. Hargrave.
Oh, look, from my perspective, I've had to spend $300,000 to investigate to save my home. I would rather spend $300,000 trying to fix the problem. It's outside of my grasp. Any changes I make, I need council approval. Like, it's not sane for someone to spend the amount of money and time and effort I've done if these weren't facts that were really occurring to me. I've documented the photos and the videos to prove beyond any reasonable doubt. Like I'm at the point now where it's legal or praying to Jesus to save my home. So that's just my position on it all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hargrave. Okay, I think we've heard from everyone now. As indicated at the beginning of the meeting, I'll now be adjourning the meeting for the panel to deliberate on both matters that we've heard. I can't advise how long that process may take, but at the end of that process, we will come back online to announce our decisions. So it's up to those participating in the meeting at the moment to decide if they wish to stay online or leave the proceedings. I'll be asking you to leave the proceedings anyway, I should say. The minutes will be available sometime next week. So thank you. If those non-panel members and non-council members could now depart the meeting. Thank you again for your time and participating in the meeting. Thank you. Tracy, can you advise when we're good to go? Good afternoon, and we'll now reconvene the Hawkesbury Local Planning Panel meeting. The panel has deliberated and has made the following decisions in relation to item 1, DA 9722, 22 Bosworth Street, Richmond. That the Hawkesbury Local Planning Panel, exercising the function of the council pursuant to section 4.16 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, grant development consent to the DA for alterations and additions to the community facility at lot 1 DP 1127074, known as 22 Bosworth Street, Richmond, subject to the recommended conditions in the council report and subject to the conversion of the recommended deferred commencement condition to an operational condition. The reasons for the approval are as follows: that the development is permissible within the B2 local centre zone under the Hawkesbury Local Environmental Plan 2012 and generally satisfies the requirements of the applicable planning and provisions. The development will be consistent with the emerging and planned future character of the Richmond locality and will not adversely impact on the heritage character of the surrounding context. The development provides for the continuation and enhancement of a valuable community facility that services the local community. The development will not significantly impact the traffic conditions of the local traffic network. The issues raised in the submission have been considered and on balance do not warrant the refusal of the application. And for the reasons given above, approval of the application is in the public interest. In relation to item 2, DA 146/22, 55 Wells Street, Pitttown, that the Hawkesbury Local Planning Panel, exercising the functions of the council pursuant to section 416 of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979, approved the development application for subdivision of lot 21 in DP 839413, known as 55 Wells Street, Pitttown, subject to the recommended conditions of consent. The reasons for the approval are as follows. The development is permissible, the proposed development is permissible under the Hawkesbury Local Environmental Plan 2012. The proposed subdivision satisfies the density and minimum lot size controls of clause 4.1 brackets 3 and 4.1c brackets 2 of the Hawkesbury Local Environmental Plan 2012. The proposal is generally consistent with the Hawkesbury Local Environmental Plan 2012, relevant planning instruments, Hawkesbury Development Control Plan 2002, and policies that apply to the development. The proposal is consistent with the Pitttown Stormwater Management Strategy, and it provides an extension to the local flood evacuation route along Wells Street. The proposed development is consistent with the emerging and planned character of the Pitttown residential precinct. The Department of Planning and Environment has provided certification to satisfactory arrangements towards the provision of state infrastructure. The proposal is categorised as integrated development, and general terms of approval have been issued by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. The issues raised in the submissions have been considered and on balance do not warrant the refusal of the application. However, the submission raised issues of concern in respect to the operation of the stormwater detention basin and its impact on number 70 Wells Street. As such, the panel suggests that council undertake a review of compliance with conditions of the basin approval. For the reasons above, approval for the application is seen to be in the public interest. That brings an end to the panel's determinations, and I will now officially close the meeting at 12:16 p.m. Thank you for everyone for their participation in the meeting today.